For once, this is going to be an easy video. This is the Be Quiet Pure Bass 501, the update to the 500 from 2019. Now, this is not a high-end case. It shouldn't be seen as such. It's essentially Be Quiet's lowest possible tier, an entry-level case. Nothing special, no extra stuff, just a pure case. Compared to the previous gen, this is supposed to be an upgrade, and for the most part it is true, like the all mesh stuff front panel. There are going to be 3 different versions of this, an all black one with all of the panels in choking mode, basically. One where the front keeps breathing, but both panels are closed off metal. And this airflow black paired with a 2.9mm thick tempered glass side panel, which, by the way, is like the thinnest glass I have ever seen to come from Be Quiet, which is kind of sad, but I mean, hey, it's their budget line, so yeah. But okay, let's start at the beginning and talk about everything what you will or will not get with this beginner type of case. Standing on the table, it is 465mm high, about 430mm deep and 230mm wide, so pretty small compared to what we usually see from Be Quiet, and even slightly shorter than the Pure Bass 500FX subversion that we did have on the channel back when it was released. But overall, it is somewhat of a small mid-tower. Compared to the original ones, we do in fact find some upgrades, like the mounting of the glass side panel. Those dreadful like go-through screws are gone, and we are left with 2 catching screws that allow the hooks to come loose. It is still not the best approach, it is still like very last gen approach, but it is definitely better than what we had before. On the inside, we'll find support for the usual stuff, mini ITX all the way up to 80X, with all the spacers pre-installed, thankfully. Now, apart from the motherboard, compatibility as a whole does suffer a bit due to like size restrictions. CPU air cooler wise, we are down to 185mm, which is still kind of a lot, don't get me wrong there, but it's less than the Pure Bass 500FX. The GPU can be up to 365mm long until you start hitting this part here. That's where the front fans go in, or where that one front fan is pre-installed in, essentially. Which, again, it's plenty. And I even installed a radiator in front of that card, so you can do some stuff in here. But keep in mind that any potential radiator in the front is going to eat away from that max 365mm. Into the other directions, it's a very different story. We've got like 195mm, like width, which is plenty even for something like the Nvidia Octopus. For fans and radiators in general, Be Quiet includes 2 by default. We got a 140mm 1200 RPM quick Pure Wing 3 in the front as intake, and another one in the back as exhaust, and that's essentially like another part of the upgrades from the last to the current gen. For a very budgety build, I don't see that as a problem. I think that will do for most builds that are aimed for this type of case. But of course, more is better, and thankfully you can stuff way more in here. The front supports either 3 140s or 3 120mm fans, and the top supports another 2 140s or 120s. And that would be max, and considering the size of the case, pretty much everything at that point will be, or every important side would be covered by fans, so it's quite stuffed. For radiators, on the other hand, it's a bit of a different story. There, the front supports either up to 1 360 or a 280mm rad, but the top supports solely 120mm base rads by default, so a 120 or a 240. And I had to learn that the hard way, because my 280 didn't fit in the top, which, to be clear, isn't Be Quiet's fault. Their manual clearly states 240. Nothing about 280, so I just didn't read that, but yeah, you need to keep that in mind. If it's a thin one, or if you use a thin 50mm thick fan, you might get it in, but for 99% of combos out there, you will just end up hitting the RAM itself. It doesn't even matter if it's an ultra ARGB RAM model, whatever, it just won't fit. And if that's a problem, you might also expect the 8-pin power plug for the CPU to be a problem. There are holes for that. That's not it, but if you'll try to connect it after installing the top fans, yeah, good luck. Like with my sausage fingers, it's install the 8-pin before you mount the top fans. That makes stuff so much easier. So far, so good, so let's get into the somewhat more complicated stuff. The PSU is located in the bottom in a separate compartment, which thankfully doesn't have a see-through window, nobody needs that. Be Quiet says it can be up to 180 millimeters or up to 200 millimeters long if you reposition the hard drive cage in front of it to its offset position. And that might sound like a lot, but we did use the new Pure Power 12 in here without any modular cables, which that one isn't that long to begin with, and it was kinda cramped, but it doesn't really have to be, because if you don't need the 2 3.5 or 1 2.5 inch hard drive cage at all, you can also just unscrew it and rip it out, providing you with a case-long slot and enough space to cram all of the excess cabling into. Other than the cage, we also got 4 more 2.5 inch spots, 2 on this bracket behind the motherboard and 2 more on this bracket, which doubles as a cable hiding bracket with a removable Be Quiet plastic thing in the middle. And fun fact for those during installation, you can remove the whole bracket with a single screw in the back, giving you the free space that you need to install an ATX motherboard, or you can just slightly bend the 24-pin power port of that bracket towards the back. Of course, don't overdo this part. At some point you will permanently bend it, but for a quick install, this really does it. And now let's talk about the cable management. To start on a good note, the front buttons are a big ass plug. I like that. But from there on, it just gets kind of hard. There are holes in the top and bottom of the motherboard. That's fine. They are just not huge or protected, and there is no specific one for the GPU, which is kind of sad. And routing the 24-pin is somewhat easy. It's a giant hole with a piece of metal hiding your fuck up, so that's nice. But that's really about it. In the back, the biggest gap I could find was like 2.5 centimeters or 2 centimeter like throughout the case. And yes, we do have a bunch of Velcro ties to make things easier, but the thickness of the 24-pin alone made it quite hard to just close the right side panel like at all. The thing that helped me a lot here was removing the hard drive cage. That basically gave me the space that I needed to hide or to stuff all the leftover cabling from the non-modular power supply that I used. No idea how I would have done it otherwise. And on that note, not that I forget it, the front fans are mounted inside of this bracket, which, okay. But a front installed radiator would go onto the back side of that bracket, which is also still fine. But if your hard drive is left in its default position, you will be left with about 35 millimeters between the fans and the cage, which is fine for most AIOs, like the average AIO is 27 millimeters, so that's fine. But if you're planning to go full custom with a, let's say, 60 millimeter thick radiator, because the PSU tunnel does allow for that, you will need to remove the cage altogether. So to get back to the cable management part, it is just challenging. It is not impossible, really not. I think we did a quite fine job considering the setup that we have, but it's definitely the most restrictive aspect of this case. On a less restrictive note, the I/O is built into the main compartment and coming through the front panel of the case, and it now consists of a 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, 2 USB 3.2 Type-A's, a combined audio in and out, and a big-ass power button. Nothing fancy for nowadays, but definitely a necessary upgrade from the original Pure base. And one thing that Be Quiet did somewhat well are the dust filters. The top spot have this piece of plastic with a sheet in the middle. Looks better than just like a sheet with nothing, and it is feeling quite a lot nicer. And the bottom one is removable from the front, not to forget the swivelable one, which is hidden behind the front panel. The only thing I would have wished for is if the front one was removable without removing the whole front panel. That also, to be honest, I don't really see how they would have managed that, except for like forcing people to 90-degree turn the case upside down, but that's no, I mean. And before I forget another thing, there is actually something other new inside of this case. Next to the usual included goodies, we also got a bunch of brackets. In case that you want to mount the GPU horizontally, Be Quiet actually found a cool new way of doing this. First, you need to remove all of the existing PCIe brackets, and then you got these two here to replace them. One for the second from the top and another one for the most bottom one. And this basically allows you to install a GPU onto the existing setup. Pretty cool. Be Quiet says that this will support up to 4 PCIe slot GPUs, but I also think that this will entirely depend on the type of riser cable that you bring and how basically deep, or in this case high, your GPU is, and at what point what will touch another thing. So this may vary, but pretty cool method. Quality wise, It's still a Be Quiet case, but you can definitely feel that this is like their baseline consumer slash integrator kind of case. The right side panel does still have that anti-noise foam on there. Sure, very Be Quiety from them, but considering what we are used to from Be Quiet, every piece of metal is somewhat easily bendable. I can pretty much bend everything with a single finger, or just take that cable hiding bracket. Sure, I can bend it to make my life easier, but it's also kind of weird that I can bend it in the first place. So overall, it's still fine, but this definitely has like 1 foot inside the budget category. Design-wise, it's a nice looking refresh. Gone is that central divider that served as an RGB spot at some point, and all we are left with is basically mesh. And I do appreciate that the mesh is going around the front panel, like it does the curve, and I think that curve looks kind of neat. So it's a pure base. If anybody expected this to be the next big thing, I mean, of course it's not. It's a pure base. This is supposed to be easy. It's supposed to just do its job and be affordable. And so far I can say that this thing hasn't been doing what it is supposed to do. Compatibility so far is more than fine considering the overall size of the case. Top radiator might be a hiccup, I get that, but at least the front delivers. Speaking of which, the front is very airflowy. I wouldn't say more or less than the previous one. That's like hard to impossible to measure for us. But the benchmark that we did do in here showed that there is not really a restriction. We had the same GPU running in the light base like 2 weeks ago. And there we had 3 fans like blowing onto the GPU, and here it was a degree harder without any fans, or maybe just minimally the bottom radiator fan that was blowing some air underneath it, but I don't see any restrictions, and the smoke just goes perfectly through the case. The only real like budgety thing I see is cable management as a whole. It's just not like anything on the higher end lineup, but yeah, who would have thought? The only thing I really disagree here is the price. The Airflow windowed black one is supposed to go for 105 euros or USD. This price can go a bit down if you choose to choke all of the fans and stop looking at the interior, but I still believe it is just way too much. I understand why Be Quiet top of the line cases, like the dark base or the light base, can cost upwards of 200 bucks. I fully get that. But in a time where I can get a Monte case with all the neat little extras and double window and I don't even know what, for the same price as the bare minimum baseline version from Be Quiet, like no features, just everything standard, for the same price, I just don't see how this is an interesting choice in comparison. I mean, as a standalone easy case, sure, but just not comparable to what else you can get for your money. So where do we stand? It's a pure base, no extra features, nothing fancy, it does the job, and that's really about it. Can I recommend it? I mean, sure, if you are looking for the somewhat all-black minimalistic look, and the case does deliver what it is supposed to deliver, that's sure, but if you want to get more for your money, there are alternatives or better price-to-performance options out there, definitely. Like anything from Montag, you will get more for your money. But okay, this should be all for the new Be Quiet Pure Base 501 Airflow Window Black. Wow, Be Quiet really is rocking these names lately. Oh, on a side note, we have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And we got channel membership, so if you are planning to sell your soul for an RG poop emoji, that's one way to go. But if not, I'm also releasing the content to all members 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Except for the NDA stuff, because, you know, I don't want to get sued. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to open up a betting site to let people gamble what product a company will release next. I will put my money on a 501 FX. I just know it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at this case. It's definitely way more expensive, but it also has a lot more features. Hope to see you on the next one. Bye bye.